I've entitled our meditation this morning, Looking Back at His Love. And I'd like to share with you as an introduction the words of a song that was sung by Andy Williams many years ago. Love is a many splendid thing. It's the April rose that only grows in the earthly spring. Love is nature's way of giving, a reason to be living, the golden crown that makes a man a king. And so whilst this was sung by Andy Williams quite a while back, we find this morning that Jesus says to you and me as we are gathered here, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. It is the Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard who says life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. I'll say that again. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And this came to me to mind, particularly as I was reading today's gospel reading, and more so that we are reading it still in the Easter season, just after Jesus had died and had been raised from the dead. But this particular reading tells us about an event that took place prior to Easter. And it is important that we understand the context of when this reading took place to understand how we need to go forward. It also gives us a deeper understanding of when we see Jesus' response to the many things that happened to him. From Peter's denial to Judas's betrayal to his scorning on the cross. And yet Jesus continued to offer them this thing that I believe the world longs for today, unconditional love. But you see, for us to understand why Jesus responded in that particular way, we need to look at some of those events that took place prior, and I've said this, prior to Good Friday and Easter. And in a sense, this is what the disciples were doing, for they were now being left behind to continue Christ's ministry. But if they did not understand where they were coming from, they would not know what to do going forward. And I think this is aptly applies to us today. So many of us are told, oh, we must move on. We must forget the past. But it is as we ignore what has happened in the past that we continue to make the same mistakes. And so whilst, yes, correctly we need to move forward, we need to understand the pain and the hurt that brought us to a point where we could reconcile one to the other. And so we must make sure that the atrocities that took place in history do not happen again. And I think if we've been watching the news lately, I believe that the world leaders have forgotten that. We've seen the tragedy that played itself out in World War I. We see the tragedies and the killing that played itself out in World War II. We looked at the wars in Vietnam, and we look at what's happening in Palestine at the moment. Man has truly forgotten the lessons that history has taught us. And I pray that we as a faith community will not forget where we come from. And that, yes, as we surge forward, we do so with everything undergirded with love. And so for a short while this morning, friends, we go back to John 13. We go back to the night that Jesus was betrayed. And I think that, in a sense, gives us a deeper understanding of the purity of Jesus' love, the honesty about why He loved and why He chose to love unconditionally. Love has become a catchphrase, and we see songs written about it, and we see T-shirts printed about it. And people glibly talk about, I love you. People glibly sing about it. But in the same way that we say to each other, we also say, oh, but I love my new car. I love my bean soup during winter. But what does it mean? What does it really mean in the context of what Christ is calling us to? Where Christ is calling you and me to love amidst the pain and the tragedy of this world, amidst the brokenness, amidst the scorn that you and I would face when we stand up and we speak out against the injustices of this world. When we speak out against homelessness, when we speak out against unemployment, when we speak out about the continued acts of gender-based violence, where our women and our children can no longer walk around safely. And as long as we as the faith community remain silent, how dare we say that we love Jesus? This morning, you and I are being called to love according to Jesus. I give you a new commandment. Love one another just as I have loved you. And so, yes, as you're gathered here this morning, some of you have come through Sunday school, you've been through confirmation, and so you might very well be asking yourself, what is so new about this commandment? We've always heard about love. We've sung hymns about love. So what is new? Maybe, just maybe, this new commandment that Jesus is in fact calling us to, or this new form of love, is a love that hurts. It is a love that opens us up to ridicule. It is a love that is given without wanting compensation. And it is a love that calls on you and me to give of ourselves, to look beyond the circumstance, but to see the ultimate gift of God's love that come from our actions. Jesus, and perhaps the question we need to be asking ourselves this morning, how do we love? Do we in fact practice a selective love? I know very often, and particularly when mothers are asked, which child do you love the most? And we always say, ach, daardie een is my oogappel. But in their hearts of hearts, I believe mothers love all their children equally. And yes, some of us have let our parents down. We've disappointed them. But our parents continue to love us unconditionally. And so firstly, my friends, this morning, we need to learn to love without expectation. Sadly, we have grown up in a society, and society has moved in that direction that I will do if I get back. We always seek to want acknowledgement for what we do. And so we find that modern society, and more we are seeing this happening, that the I becomes the primary word or letter in our vocabulary? What can I get out of it? And we have lost that sense of community. And we are paying dearly for the price of that. And not that one longs for days gone by, but how beautiful it used to be when we used to see a child being admonished by the auntie who lived next door. And there you go home and say to mom that, oh, Auntie Susan corrected me because I was being rude. You'll get another tongue lashing or maybe a smack against the head. And I'm not talking about violence against children now, but I'm talking about how as a community we made the saying true that it takes a village to bring up a child. Because your child was my child. And when we look at our community at large, we need to say that man walking in that street or that woman walking in that street is my brother and sister. Maybe not by blood, but by the fact that we are sons and daughters of a risen Lord. You see, my friends, too easily we have coined that phrase and we've locked ourselves in our ecclesiastical towers and said that we love Jesus, but we struggle to love those who look differently to us, who speak differently to us, who perhaps are not on the same class of who we are. And we base our love on that. Because you see, I don't believe I'm going to get loved by a homeless person. But there's that expectation that if I love that homeless person, they must now respect and love me. You see, when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, he didn't do it because he wanted them to wash his feet as well. He washed his feet because primarily he wanted to express his love for them. He did not, when he saw Peter in the upper room there, bypass Peter, knowing that Peter was going to deny him. He did not bypass Judas, who he knew was going to betray him, but he bent down and he washed their feet. And so this morning you and I are being called to love without expectation. That our love should be deeply couched, should be deeply soaked with the love that comes only from God. But you see, my friends, it is with that sort of love that we make ourselves come vulnerable. Brené Brown says about this love that Jesus talks about. Love is waking every day and loving someone who may or may not love you back, whose safety we can't ensure, and who may stay in our lives or may leave without a moment's notice, who may be loyal to the day they die, or they might very well betray us tomorrow. And this is the vulnerability that we need to open ourselves to. We can't want to love providing there's an assurance that we are not going to get hurt. And so loving unconditionally makes us vulnerable. Vulnerability, my friends, is the next thing. That the word vulnerable literally means able to be wounded. And so when we are vulnerable, we open ourselves up to the possibility of being wounded, of being hurt, of being rejected, of being scorned, of being mocked. And we saw this on Good Friday as Jesus was scorned and mocked on the cross. But it did not diminish his love for even those who were doing these dastardly deeds. Yes, this morning we are called to open ourselves up to one another in love, even if the possibility exists that we are going to be wounded. Brené Brown goes on to say that to love is to be vulnerable, to give someone your heart and say, I know this could hurt so bad, but I'm willing to do it. And there is an increasing number of people in the world today that are not willing to take that risk. And so we lock ourselves up in our homes. We raise our fences. We heighten our security measures. And we seek only to love those within our immediate confine. And we miss the chance to plant that seed of love in a world that is crying out for love. A world that needs love. And we need to be asking ourselves the question this morning, how much longer are we going to be able to hold out to the levels of lovelessness that we see happening in our workplace, that we see happening in our schoolyards, as we see the breaking down of discipline within our schools. We see the breaking down of discipline within our neighborhoods. And just maybe this morning, the missing ingredient is the fact that we don't love unconditionally. And then thirdly, friends, we are called to love those who are not like us. The men and women who perhaps don't gather in our church on a Sunday morning. Those who perhaps are from another faith. We are called to love them. We don't have to agree with them, but we can love them. That neighbor who just pulls their car in and shuts their gate. We don't have to go and have tea with them every day, but love them. That government official who, yes, perhaps is taking what does not belong to him or to her. Love them. I know it's hard. We look at the breakdown in our parliamentary system, and this morning we are called to love them. And very often the love that we display is when we stand up to those injustices and we call them out for what they are doing. I do believe this morning that when a mother chastises, or a father for that matter, chastises his or her daughter or son, it's not because they do not love the child, but it's because of that deep-seated love that they have for the child. And just maybe this morning, and I'm going to use a colloquial term, and I'm sure you wouldn't mind. Perhaps we have parents, we're wanting to become our children's chummy and not their parent. And so as a result, we do not correct their ill discipline because we don't want to lose face with them. When we see the wrong happening in our neighborhoods, we don't want to lose the friendship of that person who is doing wrong. And so we remain quiet. We then cannot say, my friends, that we love Jesus. For Jesus was prepared to have himself scorned for that which is right. And so, yes, indeed, this morning we are called to challenge. We are called to call out, but we do so at the risk of being rebuked. We've seen through the ages what has happened to men and women. We look at the martyrs of our time. We look at men and women who we know, who stood out for truth and righteousness. And Jesus is the prime example of this. But it cost him his life. We look at Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who eventually died in a concentration camp. We look at the young boys and girls when we had the insurrection in our own country who lost their lives. We look at some of our parents who lost their lives for standing up for that which is right. We as a church have remained silent for too long and allowed the injustices of this world to take over. We have allowed the authorities to kill our ability to love. And this morning, as the hymn writer says, "Rise up, O men and women of God, have done with lesser things." We cannot complain about crime in our country if we are not willing to do something about it. I ask this question of anybody. We talk about poverty, and yet we have people working for us, and we pay them below the breadline. A sad reality, but something that we need to face. So we cannot talk about poverty. We cannot say that we love the lady who works for us. We love the lady who looks after our children, but we do not pay them sufficiently. And this is the love that Jesus is talking to us about. And it is as we start behaving in that manner that people might think we've lost it. But if anything, we've gained it. We've gained the ability to love once more. Those of us who are conversant with the book of Leviticus knows that out of Leviticus comes the commandment. It is to love your neighbor as yourself. But this new commandment that Jesus gives us is to love those, even those who are not our neighbors. Jesus loved the lepers. Jesus loved those who were considered unclean and unloved by God. Jesus loved the tax collectors, even calling one of the tax collectors to be his disciple. Jesus loved the Samaritans. He loved the prostitutes. He loved the poor. He loved those that society didn't even see. Is this how we love today? Or is our love selective? This morning we need to hear very clearly that Jesus considered all his neighbors. They were all loved by God. And if they are loved by God, they are deserving of your and my love. Jesus' actions redefined who our neighbor is. Perhaps we need to hear this anew this morning. Our neighbor is now anyone and everyone we have an opportunity to love. Jesus, yes, taught us to love our enemies, and I've touched on that, just as he did. It does not mean that we accept or agree what they are doing. It doesn't mean that we accept that their wrongdoings and their actions. But it is because he loves them that he calls them to repentance. He loved them and he forgave them. But he also invited them to change their ways. Jesus never loved sin, but he always loved the sinner. And yes, this morning, the 18th of May, Jesus still loves And He calls on you and me to do the same. And so in closing, as difficult as it might seem this morning, loving as Jesus loved is not easy. And Jesus never said it would be. And if we look back at His life in the light of His death and His resurrection, that it wasn't easy for Him either. And so yes, we need to hear and continually hear that it's never going to be easy to love unconditionally, without agenda or without expectation. It's never going to be easy to love in a way that makes us vulnerable, that opens us to being hurt. And it's never going to be easy to love people who aren't like us. But here's the good news, and this I believe is our closing tidbit as we leave. When we fail, and yes we will, Jesus will still love us. When we doubt Him, deny Him, even betray Him, He will still love us because of what is true, because of what true love looks like. And you know what true love looks like? Jesus kneeling at your and my feet, loving us and asking us to do the same. For it is as we live out God's love that everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. And so this morning, let us love one another until the world knows the love of Jesus. Not an easy ask, but we are asked to do this. And the question I leave, can we? Amen.